Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Rockpile Podcast tonight. Tonight, the Rockpile sponsors the Glory Days podcast as my sister and I kick off the first episode tonight, and we're going to dive into a lot of topics coaching related, parent related, and I know my sister's going to have a lot to say, so I'll bring her on in just a moment. If you're watching live on any of the social media channels, if you have a comment, a question, that you want to ask, and hopefully my sister and I can get to some of those questions and answers tonight, please feel free, put them in there. If you're watching on YouTube and you haven't subscribed to the channel, make sure you give it a subscribe tonight and then share it across all social media platforms. So without further ado, let me bring Shannon on now. Shannon, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you good.
All right, I'm excited. I was going to kick the Glory Days music off for us, but when you're live, Facebook and social media will kick us off for copyright. So if people listen to just the audio, they'll hear it. So unfortunately, no Glory Days music here tonight. So, Shan, so the first topic I want to get into, and I know we'll have a lot to say. A lot of people were tuned in um, to listen to us. So hopefully we have a lot on the agenda. I'm not sure we'll get to everything, but the big one that I want to get into is a lot of times we talk a lot about the coaches today in any sport versus the coaches of old. And a lot of us have said some of the older coaches would never make it today because of how hard they were. You've lived it. You're still an active coach. You've coached in a lot of different eras with field hockey. So I'll start with you first and say current coaches versus old coaches. What are some of the big differences in your eyes?
This is very interesting because you kind of nailed it on the head. I obviously was an athlete from real young, played high school sports, went on to play college sports, and now here I am coaching. And when I think back to, back in the day type of coaching style, I feel as though that would never be allowed in today's day and age. And I don't want people to think that I think it's bad. It's just different. And what I mean by that, um, I think of some of my former coaches and just the intensity, just how they spoke to us. And what I find from now to before is right now we can't treat each athlete the same. We have to treat our athletes based on who they are. And I feel like back in the day, coaches treated everybody the same. And, I personally, I responded, I know you're going to agree with me on this, but I responded very well to that intense type of style coaching. The in your face coaching, that really fired me up. It motivated me. But I know today, even myself as a coach, I definitely could never do that. I'll just give an example. It was not that long ago, but it was in a game. It was an intense game. It might have even been a sectional game. And I remember I yelled out a player's first and last name. That's all I said was their first and last name. Well, later on that night, I got blasted on Facebook because I used that player's first and last name. Now, I can remember one of my coaches in particular who I really, really liked a lot. And I'm not going to say what sport it was, but I can remember I was playing and something happened, and this particular coach got right in my face and just pointed their finger right at me, screaming, and basically told me to get my head out of my you know what.
Well, you could say you got your head out
Basically,
of your ass.
yeah, can you imagine? I mean, I could never ever say that to a player in today's day and age.
Shane, I got pulled by the face mask by Tom Hoken, got called an effing asshole
Yeah,
in the middle of a game.
but and that's the thing. I mean, and obviously coaches today and coaches before are still very passionate. I mean, back then they were passionate, today they're passionate, But I just feel like in today's day and age, we have to really watch everything that we say and what we do, because we cannot treat and be that intense. I mean, I do have some players that I definitely could be more intense with, but even that, I find myself, back then, I feel like a lot of coaches, pointed out your mistakes. It wasn't maybe you did this well, but next time when you go out there, you need to try doing this. It was like, they just went with the negative, but you listened to what that coach said and you went back out there and you fixed what you needed to do. Today's day and age, like when I coach, I don't do that. I always, start with a positive and then, kind of say, well, next time when you go out there, this is what you got to do. And then again, I follow it up with a positive comment. But, you are a 3-sport athlete. I mean, what do you think is the difference between, like, you coach Aiden and stuff?
Well, I can tell you this much is I think the old school coaches were better at teaching fundamentals than the coaches nowadays. We were just having this conversation at the baseball field a few nights ago, is the fundamentals of a kid in any sport. Basketball, to be able to dribble with your left hand, to understand the game, the fundamentals of the game is long gone. Because again, basketball, like any other sport now, you can play basketball all year round. You got all these AU events where these AU events are pay your $300, $400 and you go play games. I'd rather have practices than go play games. I think the coaches of old were better at teaching the fundamentals. But I also think the kids nowadays in any sport, they just want to scrimmage. Basketball, they just want to play. Football during Pop Warner with the young kids, they used to say, Coach, are we going offense against defense? And it's like, guys, we only have 2 hours. You got to work the fundamentals of the game to understand the game, and then you get into that stuff.
Yeah.
I also think one of the big differences now is I think coaches cater to players too much because they're worried they're going to quit.
I think that they're worried they're going to quit, but I also think they're worried that, the parents are going to interfere, as administration, getting in trouble with that. I think a lot of those things kind of go into the way coaches are nowadays, as opposed to back then. You named Coach Hoke and Coach Mize and, Coach Evans. I don't think they for once thought, well, if I yell at this player, even Gene Sanborn with me, if I yell at this player, I need to watch what I say because I'm going to get in trouble. They didn't think that. They, in the heat of the moment, they told you like it was. You listened to them, you respected them, and then you went back out there and you did your thing. But now, if you were to treat an athlete that way, you know what's going to happen. They're going to completely go into shutdown mode.
So here's the other thing, and you've been in the state Final Four. You've won numerous sectional titles. And I always go back, Coach Ady used to always say every year when he was coaching at New York Mills, who's a guy that's won, 2 or 3 state championships, he'd say every year I would win by 1 vote to be voted back in to coach. Now, I go back and try to put that in perspective and say, here's a guy that's one of the best basketball coaches in New York State, in the area, period. Was tough, and he's got to wait to get voted in every year by a vote or two. And I go back to, we were fortunate enough that the coaches that we had back in the day, and I'm not knocking any of the coaches today because I think there are some good coaches. I just don't think we have enough of them because I think the good coaches are sitting home because they don't want to deal with all the bullshit that you guys got to put up with now. So I think that's one area. The other thing I'll say is I think there was more respect years ago with coaches than there is now. I think you guys, even yourself, Shan, I think all you coaches in this area, and I've interviewed thousands of them on the radio over the last 8 years, the amount of disrespect from a player and a parent to any coach in general, and I will never badmouth a volunteer coach. Now, there's a lot of bad volunteer coaches, but they're still putting in their time. The amount of disrespect at that level from a kid today, a parent today to a coach, we never did that years ago. And Coach Hoke Coach Evans, Coach Mize, Dad, all those guys were great coaches. We were scared of those guys because we didn't want to let them down.
And that's what I'm finding. It's, and there's a couple different directions that I want to go with that, because one of the things is, and you're right, the respect thing is huge. And it's not even just in sports. Like, I see, obviously I teach in a high school, and I was just saying this just at our graduation. I was appalled at the language that was being used with, staff that were sitting right next to students, F-bombs. I can remember when Linda Harjong or Christy Freese, said something to us. We sat there and we listened. We didn't have any comments back. I think of Lynn Scharf, from Camden, longtime coach. Nobody ever questioned, what, she told her players. But the flip side of that, I know firsthand that there definitely are some coaches out there that are definitely intense, but to the point where they're crushing athletes. And in that situation, I think a lot of these athletes are afraid to speak up because they may lose their playing time or whatnot, because, no athlete should be spoken to in a disrespectful way. You got to know your athletes. And, but again, back in the day, you just respected, you didn't question, you just listened and you did it. But so much has changed, with the kids today. And I was just having this discussion with a few of teacher coaches today. And I was saying, and this kind of actually goes into one of the topics that you and I are going to discuss at another point, but just the whole parent side of things. And I do think parents also have to play a huge role in that, with, teaching their kids to be respectful to adults, because, it is very scary with the world that we're living in today. Like, I look at Michaela's generation and even look at Aiden's generation, and questioning coaches and cursing and attitudes. And it's just not a good situation, because all that carries into, when they get a job someday. You can't be disrespectful to your boss. You're not going to agree with what your boss tells you, but you have to listen and be respectful. And if you don't agree with your coach, then by all means, be respectful and kind of talk it through. But it blows my mind. I mean, some of the text messages, and that's a whole nother avenue, social media, but like even the text messages, I would never, we didn't really text back in the day. But I would never text coaches some of the messages that I've gotten from players, from parents. I mean, it blows my mind.
I think the other thing is the parents now, and again, this is no disrespect to any of the athletes in Central New York. We don't have a lot of Division I players. There's a lot of really good high school players that I think moms and dads think they're going to go play at Michigan or Ohio State. They're going to play this really big time football or whatever the sport is. And I think what people have to understand is there's also a lot of good Division II. I mean, Utica University right here, Division III, is one of the best Division III programs. It's okay to play Division III, and if you're lucky enough to play at any level,
sport, and any sport. Level,
But I think parents today, even at a young age now, I got heckled coaching AAU basketball by sixth graders and sixth grade parents that that think that their kid is the next LeBron James. The one thing I don't remember, and maybe because again we were both good athletes, decent athletes, right?
No, I wasn't decent, Rock.
I don't remember after a game on a Friday night anybody waiting to talk to Tom Hoke.
It didn't happen.
It just didn't happen. It never happened. And I don't remember. I mean, obviously the social media now, Shane, is huge. There's the group messages, there's Facebook. Everything we're doing tonight is all over social media. So I get it. And Herb Hand, who obviously I remember telling Dad and I, is that when it comes time for recruiting, they've passed up on kids based off of their social media profiles and some of the posts that they put on there. So for parents that are listening, whose kids are active on social media, who put all this stuff up, coaches are watching every move that you make from now until you're either, a junior, senior, being recruited and so forth. But going back to the respect part, I just don't think that the old school coaches, we were scared. Like in my generation, I was fortunate enough through Little League. We had Dad, we had Mike Davis, we had Joe Ryan, we had Pete Suma. Like we had really good Little League coaches. Basketball, I had Coach 80, Nick D'Argenio, Dad, who were three really good basketball. Baseball, Archie Sinfracco at Franklin Field, Billy Vinci, Fee DeCosti, Jimmy, Joey Surace through baseball. And then, obviously football was Coach Hoke, was Coach Ferrucci, Coach Mize, the whole shebang. We played for some really good coaches. Not that there's not good coaches today. I just don't think there's any of them that are like the old school. Now, I say this, and I'm going to be a little biased here, is I've always said that some of the old school coaches would never be able to survive today. However, I do think there were some of those coaches that would have been able to adapt. And I think Dad was one of them, who was able to adapt, because if you listen to some of the players that I've interviewed that played for Dad and I, they would say, well, your father was the mellow one. You were the tough one, because Dad got it with time.
Yeah.
If Dad was that hard nose like he was back at Westmoreland and Proctor and those days, kids wouldn't want to play football for him.
No.
But nowadays, it's like you can't show any style of that, because like if you yell, kids are going to go home and tell mom, well, why'd you yell at my kid?
Yeah.
And they can go play a different sport.
Yep.
But the amount of disrespect to me I see it at Aiden's age, 12-year-old kids, 11, 12-year-old kids. It's absolutely pathetic. And the parents should be absolutely ashamed of themselves that their kids act that way.
Spinning off of what you're saying, the whole respect issue. Now, for field hockey, I feel like they haven't done it in a while. But one of the awards that my teams have received in the past have been the Sportsmanship Award, which was given by our officials, our board, where they would pick a team, where the coaches, the players demonstrated, top-notch sportsmanship. And I always say that, to me, having good sportsmanship goes beyond anything else. And, as a coach, how I act on the sideline, if I'm acting like a buffoon and I'm screaming at officials and I'm screaming at my players, what example am I setting? I want to be that role model that my players look up to. I want to be known for, Shannon McFerrin from Camden. She doesn't question officials. She doesn't, act out of control. Now, trust me, I've had several officials where I have wanted to walk onto the field, but I also know that I can't do that. And I think that's where we as coaches, we have to be good role models for our athletes, so they see how we're behaving. I can tell you, one of my former players, who is a phenomenal official, sadly enough, is not officiating anymore, because a couple years ago, maybe now, was verbally attacked after a field hockey game and during the field hockey game, and she will not officiate anymore. And that's why, if you look across the board, whether it's football, whether it's field hockey, whether it's soccer, look at the amount of officials that we have lost, because even, parents from the stands, coaches, players, are screaming. Now, obviously, we know that there's going to be calls that are made. And sadly enough, I have lost games due to some poor calls that were made in a game. But, the big thing is, if we want these sports to be around and we want officials to come out, we really have to, watch what we say and how we act. But again, if you notice, everything is circling back to the word respect. And, whether you're a coach, whether you're an official, whether you're a player, whether you're a teacher, an administrator, a parent, you should respect each other. And I just feel like that's just not there. And it needs to be there. It needs to be there for every, aspect of life.
Well, I'll tell you, I have more respect for officials now than obviously when you're playing and growing up. You like to yell at the referees for missed calls, and there's been a lot of missed calls that have cost coaches games.
Mhm.
But I think nowadays, coming up with youth sports and seeing how bad parents are on officials for the amount of money that officials make, worth it.
No.
I mean, there's been, if you get on social media, there's been parents that have went on the field. I mean, look at Rome Pop Warner 2 years ago, I think it was, or 3 years ago.
Yep.
So a parent ran on the field and punched a referee, and a whole melee broke loose, and Pop Warner was canceled. Youth
Yep.
basketball, in the summer league, there was a fight during basketball season with parents. They canceled the basketball. Now everything's been back up and running, which has been good. But I go back to try to even saying, even in the real world, even in any leadership position, it comes back to the respect that if you have people that aren't doing the right things, your core values, they need to be disciplined.
Yep.
But again, if you get on some of these players, I think again now with these indoor facilities where kids can play one sport all year round, and especially in the small schools, you take Camden or Westmoreland or some of these small schools, it's so important to have a 3-sport athlete.
Yeah.
Well,
I was laughing because when you picked that topic, I thought, okay. So the hard part about me is obviously from the coaching perspective, to my athletes, I stress the importance of don't just specialize in one sport, be a multiple sport athlete. Why? It's going to prevent injury, the whole muscle memory thing. If you're just playing one sport, you're using the same muscle groups, whatever.
Yep.
But then on the flip side of that, look at, my own kid, Michaela, obviously, who was a single sport athlete. She only did soccer, and it's not because that's all she wanted to do, but unfortunately, and again, this is a cool thing about our podcast, because I feel like even though we set topics, we could honestly spider web into different things, because you look at the one sport athlete, but like, for example, Michaela played club soccer out in Syracuse. That whole commitment thing, it wouldn't be fair for her to do club soccer and then sign up to do volleyball or lacrosse that she wanted to do, and then tell those coaches, well, you know what? Sorry, coach, whatever, but I have a club soccer game. And that just didn't happen. So obviously Michaela, chose the whole soccer aspect, but that's a whole nother topic, because I feel bad for these kids. And I can here's a perfect example. So this is probably, besides COVID, one of the first time ever. I mean, I've been coaching varsity field hockey at Camden for 23 years. I have done summer league just about every summer that I've coached in Camden. Well, this summer is going to be my first summer, besides COVID, that I am not. Why? Because now I battle travel softball. Now, my former athletes, and when I say former, I'm going back probably about maybe 6 or 7 years ago. It was never, well, Coach Mick, on Wednesday night, I have travel softball. So unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to come to field hockey. No, what they did was they rotated. 1 week they came to field hockey, the other week travel softball. And that's not the case anymore. I have a lot of girls that play softball, which I love, because I was a softball player. But it's hard because now I, can't do my summer league, because I have those athletes that are strictly playing softball on a Wednesday night. So I had to do something, just at Camden and pick another night. I think it's really hard for these kids. I mean, think about it. When you and I were younger, I mean, I had on the field hockey side, and I'm going to focus on field hockey because that was a sport that I went to college to play. But, I had my season, from August to November. And then I had futures that I did a couple times a month. And then I wish they still had this, but I had the Empire State Games. Now you look at, there's club field hockey, there's tournaments, and it's so much harder for these kids, to do different things because now you're having to balance in, okay, I'm going to play club field hockey, but then I'm going to do AAU basketball, and then I'm going to do travel softball, and then let's bring this in because I being at the high school, but I'm going to be in the musical. And it's just, I feel bad for these kids because they have so many things that they want to do, and the pressure of going back to like not ticking off their coach because they're not able to do something, and they want to just appease all their coaches and make everybody happy. It's just really, really hard with all the different things out there.
No, you hit on a lot of good points. So, for example, Aiden right now can play. So he'll be going in the 7th grade, and I think Nick's going to have a 7th and 8th grade summer basketball for kids that want to play. There's a summer baseball that, if Aiden wants to play, he can play. He's going to be doing some workouts with modified JV and varsity football. So if you're a coach, so you're giving all these examples, and you don't see one of your players all summer, but that they're busy doing, whether it's softball, travel softball, whatever it is, they're busy. They're not sitting home every night playing video games or going out partying. Maybe they, I don't know. But come day one of camp, there are certain players that I'm sure you could identify and say they're going to come in shape because they're a player, right? Yep. It's the other ones that might be doing the other sports that you're going to say, well, I know Chrissy could come in. She could come in out of shape because she hasn't done anything. So as a coach, the only thing I would say is, like, I think the athlete has to understand that if there is a kid doing basketball all year, they're probably going to get a little bit better than you might get in basketball because they've been focused on basketball. Now, I think the skill setting, I think if you're a good athlete, I think you can adjust.
100%.
But I think some of those players, obviously, that might not be as gifted as some of the others, they're going to fall behind, which may discourage that kid to where he may say the following year, I ain't playing.
Yep. And not to interrupt you, but I'm just sitting here laughing. I'm thinking of the thousands of dollars that I have spent, and I am not complaining because, I think we all know in our family, obviously the club soccer for Michaela is, how she was able to. Hi, Maddie.
Wave Dan Cheney.
But that's how she was able to get her, work hard towards her D1 scholarship. But it's just, I feel bad for these kids just because financially, I mean, let's talk about this. All the thousands of dollars that I spent for Michaela, what happens if you have those families that have amazing athletes for kids, but can't afford? I mean, here's an example. I was paying, 400 and something every, 3 months for club soccer. And that's not even, the 2 years ago when we flew to Arizona and we flew to Florida twice. It's just all these situations I think we need to take into account that not all families can afford that. And I know Dad and Mom have even said that, you're crazy spending all that money and traveling. But I feel bad because I can think of athletes, that have played with Michaela or even that I've coached that financially, they just don't have those means to do what I've done for my kids. And it's really not fair.
I just think the 3-sport, I mean, who knows? I mean, I tell Aiden and Madison, whatever they want to play, they play. I'm like, Aiden, if you don't want to play baseball, then don't play baseball, but you're going to do something. But I just go back to the 3-sport piece and say the kids get to play for different coaches. They get to learn different coaching styles, right? Which I think is important. It's like when they get into the real world, they're going to have to deal with different managers that they may like, they may not like. And then I think the other thing is, I think it brings on more competition. And I think the other problem today, I don't have to worry about it with my two kids because my two kids don't like to lose in anything, is I think that being more competitive helps them as they get older. You get into the real world. I just think the one sport, you play with a lot of the same kids. You
Yeah.
play, and some of your better kids, even at Aiden's age now, who's playing travel baseball, who's playing travel basketball. It's a lot of the better kids. And like you said, financially, some kids don't have the money. But I'll say this, and I don't know this yet. Aren't there coaches that find ways for some of those better kids that might not have the money, find ways to get them on a team?
I'm sure they do. I mean, like I know through Michaela's club soccer, they had like like scholarships, but like those scholarships paid for, the club fees and stuff. I know for one as a parent, I wouldn't mind, if I had to bring a kid and that maybe didn't come from a family that had a lot of money, I would have no issues doing that. But then it comes down to, think of that poor parent, like their pride, having to say, hey Shannon, do you mind taking Michaela? There's a lot like pride. You don't want to hurt pride by asking constantly because you can't afford
Mhm.
to pay for that. And that's why it's so hard. And I'm looking at my notes that I had jotted down, and um, a couple of the things that I wrote down here, and you nailed it too, is just playing for different coaches. I look at some of my players, they play for me, and then, they go on and they do, like, say, indoor track, or they do basketball, and then they do softball. And I can tell you, all of the coaches are very different.
Mhm.
Different coaching styles, different personalities, and some good, some maybe not so good. And but it exposes these kids to different personalities. But also, I think it helps athleticism. You look at, say, field hockey, and the eye hand coordination and the cutting and the movements like that. you know Softball, you're still having that eye hand coordination, but now you're having to watch a ball and hit it and then run the bases. And I just think it's good for kids to get involved in different things. I do find once they get to the high school level, and I even know myself, I was a 3-sport athlete. I did field hockey, basketball, and softball. After my freshman year, the basketball went out the door because I knew that definitely wasn't going to be an avenue I was going to pursue. But even then, I played, field hockey, and I did softball, and playing summer softball. I did that. You played multiple,
Mhm.
sport, had multiple experiences, good and bad, with different coaches and just the game itself. So,
Shane, the other thing, is we're talking about that multiple three-sport athletes, is I think the other thing that you risk with one sport is the kid gets burned out.
mhm.
You know what I mean? And then I think what's missing nowadays too is, so years ago, I'll just use baseball because I never played Legion baseball because I went to football camps in the summertime. That was my thing. And back in the day, if you went to camps, you weren't allowed to play Legion baseball. And I mean, that was just the old way with Coach of Bones. But at the same time, if you missed and you were on vacation, you didn't deserve to play anyways. But that's a whole different area for topic for
Yeah.
another time. But I almost feel like back in the day, like it meant a lot to wear at RFA jersey. And now I feel like some kids, it's more important for them or means more to wear, whether it's a club team that they're playing on in the club, a travel team. Some kids may even get it. Maybe Legion baseball is bigger than playing for the school. When we went to school, it was all about playing for the school. There was none of those other teams in the summertime. I feel like that's kind of went away too because there are more teams
Mhm.
that these kids can play on, right?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I gotta say, I'm distracted by the comments. Here's my adult ADHD, but I gotta agree with Carla. she was saying, and I could speak on behalf of this, but
Yep.
Carla put on there, the Bobby Page Foundation is amazing. They help families in financial need pay for sports. Carla, I can honestly tell you, years ago, I did have a field hockey player that the Bobby Page helped. They gave this particular player money to attend a field hockey combine that was pretty costly. So I totally agree that, you know, the Bobby Page Foundation, you know, supports our athletes. You know, obviously Bobby was into sports and things, and, you know, they want to keep his memory alive. And, you know, whether it's hockey, it doesn't matter what sport. They're wonderful with, you know, helping any kid in need out if they want to, you know, play any extra sport and stuff.
Yeah, Carla's great. Carla is actually the president for Rome Pop Warner. Her husband was the 10U coach last year that did a great job there, and now he's going to be the 12U coach. And Rome Pop Warner, the last year, and I know this year will be the same. They have completely turned around that entire program. So
Yep.
Carla's one of the good ones out there. So she wanted to sponsor tonight's show. I said I didn't want any money tonight. So, but Carla, we appreciate it. Shan, a stat I want to throw at you,
Oh boy.
and I had to look this up, but I only had from 2017. I
Yep.
didn't have the one from this year. The NFL draft, out of 32 players that were drafted in the first round, 30 out of 32 of them played multiple sports.
Mm-hmm.
2020 out of 32, 29 out of 32 played multiple sports. Again, as a parent, I'm kind of on the fence because I could see that at some point in time, like Madison plays everything, but at some point she's going to have to kind of pick a few, right? As she
Yep.
gets older, what do you want to do? Because again, some of her little girlfriends, who's playing field hockey, who's playing lacrosse, and who's doing all that. And Aiden's the same way. I'm like, he said to me not too long ago, he said he wanted to try lacrosse. And I'm like, okay.
Yep.
But you realize that lacrosse, I think, is what? Is it a spring sport in Rome?
Spring. Yep.
That's
So it's the same time as baseball.
I said, that's baseball. So it's almost like, well, he's been playing baseball since he was 4 or 5 years old. You throw that down the tubes now and say, okay, go give lacrosse a try. Like I'm on the fence with all that. But
but I do think at the younger level, that's the beauty of being able to try all these different sports. And then obviously, I hate to say it, but you get to 7th grade, and that's kind of where now you kind of got to go down your avenues that you want to go down, and you can't be, you know, playing 90 million, you know, different sports. You more or less have to specialize in, you know, your 2 or 3 sports that are out there.
Shane, the other thing I don't think we have enough of, we talked about it when we started the show tonight, is the lack of coaches. I don't think we have enough coaches because then we were talking about the parents. Like, you deal with parents all the time. Like, how do you change it? Like, how do you change the parenting?
I gotta be honest, you know, all in all, I've coached for 24 years, which I think is a long time. I'm not a young coach anymore, unfortunately. And I gotta be honest with you, I can probably count on one hand the amount of parents that I can tell you were downright nasty. I've been very fortunate, but I think a lot of it has to do with another fancy word, communication. And I know for me, being able to communicate, like, here's an example. When I first started coaching, I wanted to be friends with my players. I didn't want any of my players to hate me. So I just fed them every line that they wanted to hear, and even the parents. Where now, you know, I go to my parent meeting and I tell them what my expectations are so that we're on the same page. And I think that that's important. But I got to tell you, like, I kind of giggle at the fact where, you know, I will say, you know, I have a 24-hour rule. Like, after a game, don't come up to me and ask me why your kid didn't play or why Jennifer was on the field and my kid wasn't. That's not the time or place, because let's face it, whether you win a game, you lose a game, your emotions as the coach are up here. The parents' emotions are up here. I had a situation, it was years ago, but after a game, a parent walked across the field and came at me screaming about why I took their kid off the field, why they didn't play. I mean, and was following me. And I'm just like, I'm not talking to you right now. You need to calm down, give me 24 hours and we'll talk. And, I think that, like I said, communication is important, but knowing when to communicate and how to communicate. Because I can tell you one of the things as a coach that I really struggle with is the comparing. Well, you have Jennifer out there playing, but my daughter's not playing. Well, here's what I'm going to tell you. You're not at practice to see what your daughter is or is not doing, whether it be a lack of effort, not listening to their teammates, or not listening to me or my assistant coach. I mean, there's so much that, goes into it. And I get it, because obviously, you have kids, I have kids. We want to protect our kids. We don't want any coach to, humiliate or degrade our kids. But the one thing that I will say, and I will tell you, this drives me crazy, and I see it all the time, is parents wanting to talk for their kids. And like, I just had my preseason meeting, and I said, here's the deal. I want to talk to you. I don't want to talk to your parents. I don't want your parent telling me why you missed practice. You are going to reach out to me and you are going to tell me, because not for nothing, you're a 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old kid. You should not have your parent being the one to communicate.
Yeah, I think that's huge. I think the other thing is, with the parents or whatnot, is, again, you go back to the whole respect thing that we talk about. Is I think there's a lack of professionalism. I think the lack of communication is huge, but I also think it goes back to, and I think Coach Evans used to say this, or Dad, or somebody, you don't come to my workplace, so I'm not coming to your workplace. And again, when I look at coaches in general, and I've had opportunities to get back into the varsity level, and one of the reasons why I say right now is not the right time, not because I'm busy with the kids, which I am, is if you're going to coach and you want to do it the right way, you got to put the time in.
Yep.
And there's a lot of coaches now that I think do it for the paycheck. And let's be real, you've coached for 20-something years. Head varsity coaches don't get a lot of money. So when somebody says they're doing it for the money, if you really take, I don't remember what I made at Sequoia, maybe say it was $5,000. If you really take $5,000 and you start practice, you start camp in August.
Yeah.
Okay. So you go August, September, October, and then I would give the kids November, December off. And then we were in the weight room starting in January till about April. And then we would go outside in the springtime. We were still lifting weights. It's all year. So if you factor in all year, if you're doing it the right way as a head varsity coach or any coach, it's not about the money.
Right.
Right. And
it
and I
definitely
think
is not.
no, and I think nowadays, though, Shane, I think you do have coaches that may coach. I'm going to go coach track, or I'm going to go coach bowling. I'm going to go coach this. I'm going to go coach that, because hey, you know what? I can go make another $2,000-$3,000 and get paid. And listen, there's coaches out there that do that are phys ed teachers or whatever, and that's how they make their extra money to get by. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I'm saying to be a successful varsity coach, you have to be willing to put the time in. And I think a lot of those coaches that are out there, and I'll say I'm one of them, aren't coaching because I can't dedicate the time to do it the right way. And I think there's too many coaches that don't do it for the right reasons.
Yep. And that's the biggest thing. Like, I know in my world, I mean, we start in August, we go August, September, October, November. we get December off. January starts our indoor season. And then we get a little bit of time off, and then we go right into summer league, or like at Camden, I'm doing Monday nights, we do a 6-week youth clinic. Tuesday nights we're doing our skills and drills with our girls in grades 7 through 12. If you take a look at most successful programs, those coaches do not just coach during their season. They coach all year long. And I'm fortunate enough in my house, I look at Mike, and thankfully, I mean, he is great with all the time. I mean, look at how much I'm gone, coaching. And if you're going to build a program, you have to put your heart in your time, obviously the commitment part of it, into what you're doing, or else you're not going to have a successful program. It's not going to happen.
Shan, do you think if you knew what you knew now 20 years ago, you still would have got back into coaching?
100%. I mean, I think anybody listening, I've said this for the past couple of years, when it came to Michaela and going to college, I said, when Michaela goes to college, I'm going to be done. I'm not going to coach. I want to go follow her. And here I am, and I'm fortunate that, Michaela is doing something that not many kids get the opportunity to do. She's going on to play a Division I sport. And I can't give it up. If you love coaching, you love coaching, and you're going to do it for as long as you can. I mean, look at Dad. Dad did it almost as long as, we've been alive. When you're passionate about something, and, coaching is such a rewarding experience. Like, I look at to this day, I mean, just the other day, I got a message. Well, actually, it was about a couple weeks ago now. I got a message actually from a former parent, because, we've been talking about parents. And like I said, I didn't have that many bad apples in my bunch. I've had a lot of good parents. And this was a really neat thing where I had a parent reach out to me and, thanking me for making a difference in their daughter's life. And I was a positive role model, and I was always encouraging and stuff like that. And you look at coaching and you look at the rewarding parts of it. And for me personally, when people ask me, well, Shannon, how do your teams always do so well? Obviously, I have girls that, love to play, they're committed, but also I think the biggest thing is making a connection with your athletes. As a coach, if you do not have that connection, if those players do not have their trust, they're not going to play to their full potential. I see it. I've seen it with my own kids. I've seen it with girls that, play other sports. You got to make connections with your athletes. They have to be able to trust you when you're telling them something. You as a coach, you got to believe in your player, and your player has to believe in you.
Shane, the other thing that always comes up, and you live in Rome, you're from Rome, you coach in Camden. When I live in Rome and I coached in Secoit, and Dad's never really coached in Rome except when he came back to be the JV coach to watch me play. But for coaches that don't live where they coach is also a huge challenge, because you're not one of them. So like when I went to Secoit, I wasn't a Secoit guy, so there were some parents that were on the outside saying, well, he's not from here, we want one of our own, in there. And I think one way that changed was exactly what you're talking about, was building the connections that you have with the players, which eventually you build some of those good relationships, and it helps you throughout the season. But how hard is it as a coach to come in when you're not from your hometown and you're coaching in a completely different district to win over the community?
Well, I got to tell you, I am so grateful, and I will say this on every podcast we do. Obviously, when I graduated from Central Michigan, my goal was to come back to Rome and teach and coach. Well, guess what? The coaching part of it kind of happened because I did it a year, I was a JV coach. The teaching part did not. And, the Camden part just kind of slipped on in there. I would never think of going to any other district. I can honestly tell you from the moment I started coaching in Camden, the community of Camden was so accepting of me, even though I wasn't a Camdenite. It didn't matter because they accepted me, and that's still the case today. I know, like you look at our facilities in Camden. Look at what we have for our athletes. I mean, even the community support is just huge. I look at, all the different regionals and the times that, I've gone to the state Final Four. The support of the community has been huge. Now, with that being said, I got to tell you that I like driving 20 minutes to work and then driving 20 minutes home, because sometimes it's hard to, teach and coach in a district that you're from, because everybody kind of knows your business, where I get to leave and come home and do my thing. But, I can tell you, Camden is a very, very special and unique place.
All right, I'm going to play devil's advocate here.
Okay, go for it.
I think you're 100% right. I'm not going to disagree with you. But I will also say winning makes things a hell of a lot easier.
Oh, it does.
And, Camden had a good field hockey program, but you took it to a completely different level, which is a credit to you. I'm saying is you go into a program and let's say you're from the outside and you're losing. Your first few years, you're losing. I mean, let's take Rome, for example, right?
Yeah.
You got Coach Medicis, who's been on the radio with me for a while, been on the podcast, isn't from here. And I'm sure he could probably jump on and say that the years where maybe they didn't have a great season, again, you pop on social media, they want to throw you out because, well, he's not a Roman. You look at Jake. Jake's another, friend of mine who I respect, not from Rome, came in, had some tough years, and you see what the community does. Yeah. So I'm going to say is that I agree with everything that you're saying, but I'm saying for the coaches that come in that may struggle out of the gate, it's a whole different avenue, because if Rocky is coaching and Rocky doesn't win games, but Rocky's a Rome guy, the community might be a little bit more patient with me because I'm one of their own. Don't you think that's true though in a lot of places?
Oh, I don't know, Rock. I'm disagreeing with you a little bit. I don't know.
Nick and Jake, are you guys listen? Jump on this thing. I can send you the link through the thing. Jump on, because they'd be able to tell the stories. I just think winning makes things a whole of a lot easier.
Oh, I am not going to disagree with you on that part, because obviously when you're winning, for the most part, yep, everyone is happy. But I'm here to tell you,
it's
even when I have had winning seasons, I still have caught some crap of different things that were, pointing fingers at, that whatever. But it definitely makes a difference. You are 100% right. If you're winning, everybody is in your favor. If you're losing, you kind of are under the radar a little bit more, and people kind of question, why are you doing what you're doing? And it makes it tough.
I mean, listen, don't get me wrong. If you come in out of the gate from the outside and you win, I mean, I was fortunate enough my first year at Secoit, we went 5-3, which was the first winning season there in 15 years. We made the playoffs, and I was like a hero. They were going to put a statue of me up on the property. So I think that helps.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to ask you is this, as far as, and this will probably be the last topic we can dive into here for a few minutes. I
got to tell you, as I'm sitting here, my mind is going 90 miles an hour, because obviously these are topics that we're so passionate about, because I have other things that I want to mention, but that'll be for the next podcast.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about the coaches, parents, the lack of coaches today. The other part I want to throw out there is we've debated this for the last 10 years on the radio. People say the athletes today aren't what they used to be, right? There's a lot more things today, social media. There's more things that kids can get into now that they didn't have years ago. What would you say to somebody that tells you, Shannon, the athletes today are nowhere near what they were years ago? What would you say?
Oh, I knew you were going to ask me this, and
because it comes up, right? You can debate it. That's like saying who's the greatest basketball player of all time. I would tell you Michael Jordan.
Michael
Some are going to
Jordan.
say
Right.
LeBron James because some people
Right.
didn't get a chance to see Michael Jordan play. Some people ask me all the time, Rocky, what's the best RFA football team of all time? And I say it's my team because we went all the way to the state championship.
Right.
Dad will say he didn't lose a game in 4 years or 3
Yeah.
years. So it's a fun debate, but what would your answer be?
You know, I just feel like there definitely is a difference. And I just feel like the athletes back, let's say when we played, okay,
Yep.
didn't give a crap. They didn't give a crap how their coach talked to them. They went out there and they played. It's tough because it's hard to compare all these different generations because you know what, Rock, and you said it, you look at our generation, we didn't have all this crap of like the stressors of social media and academics and what the heck? I was just reading something that just popped up. That was but yeah, it's tough to say that because I look at Camden Rock and I have a lot of really good kids that work their tail feathers off and have good attitudes and are gonna go play sports in college. So I think it's tough to compare.
So here's what I'll say. I think it's tough to compare errors, and your husband said that. He goes, "It's you can't really compare the errors." I'll say this: I think the kids years ago were tougher mentally than what the kids are today. The
Right.
mental toughness of kids years ago are nowhere near
No,
what kids are today. So I
you're
think
right.
to me that's probably the biggest difference was mentally. And I'll say the other thing is I think kids years ago were coachable. I don't
Right.
think a lot of kids today are coachable.
But that's a whole nother, when we get back on again, that's a whole nother thing that we could talk about because, and I'm going to go towards the mental toughness in general. I mean, I don't see a whole lot of it, but again, you have so many different stressors coming at them. Back in the day, the mental toughness, I mean, even now as a 47-year-old adult, when I go work out, you would think that I was still a 21-year-old kid because, the mental toughness, I'm not going to be like, oh, this hurts, that hurts. Like, look, when I ruptured my Achilles tendon and I was told, well, you can't run, you can't jump. No, I'm not going to let people tell me that. And I think that's a big thing, and it's hard. It's that mental toughness, Rock, and you know this as a coach. You cannot coach athletes to be mentally tough. You can't. I feel like you're born with it. It's within. Maybe you can tweak it a little bit, but if you are not mentally tough, you're gonna struggle. A mentally tough athlete can overcome so many different things that are thrown their direction.
Here's what I always say, and I say this to Aiden now, and I try to preach this in his head. As a coach, I would rather have a kid that's coachable, that's going to give you 110%, than the kid that's the really good athlete, but is it effing head case.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm trying to teach Aiden because as he gets older, he's going to see that maybe there's some kids that are more athletic than he is. But I said, if you work hard, any coach in the right frame of mind, if they're a good coach, teaching the right behaviors, teaching the right core values, they will take a kid that's coachable and that's willing to listen than the kid that might be the good athlete. Now, I will say this, there are plenty of youth teams where some of those core values and morals and all that get thrown away because they're better than some of the other kids. So that's kind of one of the things that I'm trying to instill. But again, I'm going to say the mental piece. I think, and Shane, I'll ask you this question. Then we'll wrap things up here. Do you think that I'll just use field hockey for you. Field hockey players today, were they as good as the field hockey girls that you played with?
Yeah.
would your field hockey team in high school beat some of the teams in today's day?
I'm going to end with this because this is what I want to talk about the next time. You know what the difference is between my field hockey team that won a state championship and different teams that I've coached? You know what so much is focused on, and it's not just field hockey? Stats.
Yep.
So
Yep.
many kids and parents are worried about their kids flipping stats. Guess what? Do you think Kara Wadilla and I, the two leading scorers for RFA field hockey on that team, cared? If somebody said to me, Shannon, how many goals do you have? I was like, I don't know. And it's not like that anymore. That is the
Yeah,
problem.
that's a good point
Yep,
because
that's the topic for our next podcast.
yep, because even on my team in my junior year, I mean, we had Tony Berry was 1,000-yard rusher, Wayne C was 1,000-yard rusher. We had Justin Davis, we had Al Bevilacqua. We had a lot of good players.
Yep.
At the end of the game, we didn't go back and say, well, who scored how many touchdowns?
No.
We played as a group. It was a team. And that was something that I think separated that team from a lot of other teams that I played on, because my senior year, we got beaten in Section 3 finals. And I actually thought my senior year team might have been as good as the junior year team. But the senior year team, there were too many kids that played for themselves and not for, each other.
Yep.
And Mike said that perfect. He put heart on there. And I think that's huge, Mike. But
it is huge. But you know what? I got to tell you, this is how I got to end, because I dug through my closet, and anybody that's watching that has had me as a coach or knows me as a person, you know that I'm all about motivational things and talking about the mental toughness. My shirt says, I can and I will, end of story. And I think that that's huge. I think as athletes and even as coaches, we need to put into our players' heads that they can do anything that they put their mind to, and don't let anybody tell them differently.
I would say my shirt, but I have the Ridge Mills parent shirt on for the 6th grade. And I was hoping tonight we'd be sponsored by Corona, because I'm drinking a Corona seltzer here on the air. So that's the other good thing about a podcast. But
Yep.
All right, Jen, it was fun. We'll a lot more to talk about on episode number 2.
Yep.
So I appreciate you jumping on tonight for the first episode, and we'll get one started for the next one. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I also, thank you to everybody that was watching. Thank you to everybody that made comments. And, when Rock and I are on here, please feel free to, ask questions. I think it'll make the podcast even better by having our audience kind of, get into what we're talking about.
Yeah, and anybody can catch the replay on YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook. If you get on there, you see it, give it a share for us. The more views and clicks we get, the better it'll be. So, all right, Shan, we're out of time.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Bye. Thanks.
So that was awesome. Great to have my sister on for the first episode tonight of Glory Days. Spent a lot of time talking about coaching, parents, players. And one thing I hope everybody gets out of this, if you're watching on the replay, we're not saying that her and I are 100% right in what we're saying. We're just being open and honest with our points of view. My sister has coached a lot longer than I have. She said 23 years in the making. I haven't coached that long. So, but I appreciate everybody tuning in tonight. Again, give the YouTube page a subscribe if you haven't. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, however you follow us, make sure to share it. Your likes and comments will help us out with more episodes. So we'll plan on episode number 2. So as I always say on the Rock Pile is where dreams become reality.